Attorney General, welcome to Stateline. I want to start by addressing a controversy which has been unfolding over the last few weeks involving Jake Danby. He was the driver involved in a fatal hit and run, and he was sentenced to a 12-month community corrections order. That sentence is now being appealed on the basis of being manifestly unjust. He's your sister's stepson. Do you regret not disclosing that potential conflict of interest publicly at an earlier stage?
Olivana, I understand the community interest in this particular case, but of course it is before the courts, so I can't add any comment to that particular case as the Attorney General. Surely if you had just acknowledged it publicly to begin with, it wouldn't have sort of gained so much attention. So it was disclosed at the time. We were in opposition at the time. There isn't anything further to add, and of course we wouldn't want to jeopardise the proceedings that are at foot now, so I really have nothing else further to add. Let's move on to some other issues. Territorians were promised a reduction in crime in the first 100 days of the CLP coming into government. There have been some small wins. Based on the latest crime data, property crime is down, but violent crime is on the rise across the territory. Is your government failing to address the underlying drivers of crime in the NT? I think for me, one of the telltale signs that we'd started to cut through on that was not only when the data came out to say that there were some types of offences which had reduced, but when I was in the mall just a couple of months ago and a couple of tourists came up and said g'day, and they were telling me about how they come to the Territory every year for a holiday, and that last year they had thought about maybe not coming up because they'd heard so much from, out of the Territory about it wasn't being safe. And they shared with me that they were really glad that they actually did come up because they noticed a really remarkable difference to how it felt in the Territory. In your own electorate, violent crime was up based on the most recent data. So can you honestly, look your constituents in the eye and say, yes, our policies are working and yes, we're doing enough to tackle those drivers of crime? But I'm really honest with Territorians, this is not a set and forget approach. We have to keep working on it. You're on the record saying that meeting the Territory's closing the gap targets can't come at the expense of community safety. How does improving the outcomes for Indigenous Australians detract from community safety? I mean, surely one of those things leads to another. Our government fully supports the work that has to be done because we do believe in closing that gap. When it comes to one of those measures, which is to reduce the number of incarcerated people who are Aboriginal, of course that statistic has not come down, and it hasn't come down for a very long time. It's not a new thing. And so the way that I look at it and the way that people talk to me about it is it's not just about Aboriginals who are being incarcerated. The way I think of it is it's about the victims who often are Aboriginals, and I think we need to start with that to say, well, if Aboriginal victims are the ones that are, having crime perpetrated against them, that's where we should be focusing on. But what did you mean by saying that closing the gap targets can't come at the expense of community safety? Can't the two things run concurrently together? And they do, yeah, they absolutely do. What I mean by that is there used to be a position that we wanted to reduce crime and therefore we had less people who were incarcerated, and that's how it felt like in the community, that there was just not being dealt with the consequences. And so we were really clear when we came to government that we did want to have consequences for offenders, and it doesn't matter what race you are, we have to deal with that. And especially because many of the victims are Aboriginal as well. And so they're the people that I'm standing up for to say, well, we need to stamp that out. We can't have crimes perpetrated against them. You say that you're standing up for Aboriginal Territorians, but there is a portion of the community, namely Indigenous Territorians, who feel alienated and targeted by a number of the reforms that your government has been putting in place. Do you recognise that rift? Our laws apply to everybody equally. And it's certainly not racist to want a safer community, and I stand by that. The fact is that I actually stand up for Territorians and victims regardless of who you are, where you're from, what your culture is. And it's really important that governments do that. I don't think anyone would argue that we don't want community safety. I think all portions of our community want to be safe in the community. But clearly, I mean, we've had 4 land councils come out and say that they think that your government's policies are racist. So how does the government mend that? Well, I question the fact that We have so many victims who are Aboriginal victims, and so how is it racist that we want to protect those people at the same time as protecting all people, which is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to protect all Territorians.
How does the government unify all Territorians around that message going forward?
I think it's clear that we want community safety across the board. It doesn't matter where you live, where you're from, what your background. It comes down to putting the victims first and putting their rights above the rights of the offenders. And so therefore there is no argument about whether it's racist or not. It applies to everybody because we put the victims at the heart of what we're changing.
Attorney General, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.